Hello, I'm John Martin, and we're here at the University of Michigan to talk to Professor Kang. He is the University of Southern California Korean Studies professor, and we're here to talk about the North and South Korean issue. And I'm reporting here from the Michigan Korean Times TV News Point. For the first time in Olympic history, the North and South Korean hockey teams were combined. Tell us what this means to America and to South Korea.
You know, in some ways this is a huge deal. In other ways it's just another step, meaning North and South Korea, and as probably all the listeners know, are very close, a lot of tension in the last year or so.
Yes.
So a couple steps back in terms of North and South Korea being willing to put this team together is actually quite significant.
Yes.
That North and South Korea both were willing to put the team and march under a unification flag and to do some events that at least superficially allow some interaction between the two sides.
I think everybody was surprised when this happened. It just seemed a couple months ago when they were threatening us with intercontinental ballistic missiles, and now all of a sudden the women's team is combined.
Well, there's still a threat. Oh. But it's one thing that I say consistently about this is, if you were watching North Korea, they knew exactly what they were doing, and they played this masterfully.
Okay.
In other words, this is not something they threw together in the last couple of weeks and said, let's change our minds, let's go to the Olympics. Very clearly, North Korea has planned what they're going to do. So if you read Kim Jong-un's New Year's speech from January 2017, he said a year ago, we are going to complete our national mission of an intercontinental ballistic missile. And you know what? This year they did. This year, in January, he said, we have completed our mission. Now we can move on to making the country prosperous.
I see.
And then he said, maybe we'll join the Olympics. So this is very clearly a plan that they were going to move forward, and now that they're in a certain position, they're willing to now take a couple steps back. But they weren't going to negotiate or take steps back until they had the nuclear missile capability, and now they do, for better or for worse.
Pardon me for interrupting. Do you think that this capability with the nuclear arms is the first step in them getting enough power to negotiate and be a player on the world stage? Is that what they're thinking?
As far as I can tell, this is entirely defensive.
Okay.
Everything the North Koreans say is defensive. Everything we say is defensive. Both sides, a little more flamboyant than usual, but both sides have consistently said for years, if you attack me first, I will attack you back. We ignore that first part of the North Korean, and they consistently say it.
Yeah.
We say, if you attack, and the North Koreans ignore that part, and they say, oh yeah, if you attack us first. So both sides are threatening each other, and both sides can threaten each other.
Yes.
But what we miss is that the deterrent calculus is actually pretty stable.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in held a meeting with a group of high-profile North Korean officials, including the country's ceremonial head of state and a younger sister of the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un has offered to hold a summit with Moon in Pyongyang through his younger sister, Kim Yo-jong, in a dramatic gesture of reconciliation after years of tensions and provocations.
Sure.
What do you think about that? The relationship between North and Korea after the Olympics. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think a couple things, to put a little bit of context on this. South Korea had 10 years of conservative presidents who over the years began to lower the kind of interaction with North Korea. North Korea responded. So South Korean trade with North Korea is now essentially zero. As of January this year, there was a hotline that had been disabled. So from that essentially as low a position you can go, both South Korea now has a more leftist, progressive president, and North Korea is in a different position now. So these are some offers to move the relationship forward a little bit, to repair it a little bit, but they're the beginning stages of this. And I think the sort of media attention has outpaced where they really are, which is Moon Jae-in. The South Korean president said, I'm open to it. He has to be open to it. You've got to take that opportunity. But it doesn't mean he's going to do it yet. And so the conditions for a meeting, I don't think, are met. And I think South Korean government right now is trying to informally say to the North, this is what it'll take. And I think one of the main things will be a missile launch moratorium by North Korea. I think that's the minimum that North Korea has to do, is they got to stop launching the long-range missiles.
Right.
And then you could actually talk about getting together.
What about the human rights abuses of the North? I know the current president of South Korea was a human rights lawyer. How is he going to deal with that?
There's two different, one of the interesting things about the human rights thing, in the United States we love to talk about North Korean human rights. Because of course it is. It is a horrific repressive regime.
Right.
The question is always, what do we do about it? And as with the missile problem, or the security problem, the human rights problem, there's two basic approaches. Hit them with a stick, pressure them until they change, or try and work from the inside and sort of pull them out, draw them out. Moon Jae-in's approach to North Korean human rights is, if we engage North Korea, the lives of the citizens will be better off.
Right.
And it's true, that will be, right? The opposite approach, the hardline approach, is we should not interact with North Korean people, no matter what, until there is less general violations and less prison camps. So Moon has one approach, which tends to run at odds with the American approach.
Right. The American approach is?
Hit them with a stick, pressure them until they change, and don't work with the North Korean people.
And so they have nothing to gain by that.
Essentially they don't, right? And this is one place where we end up, which is the United States, it's very easy rhetorically to say you should have better human rights.
Right.
But the United States consistently prioritizes that below a security situation.
Yes.
In other words, right now with the kinds of sanctions that we have on North Korea, because of its missile program, we know that many North Korean people are not having enough to eat, not getting medicines that they need. And we say that's the price the North Korean people have to pay because of what the regime is doing.
Right. This is about family reunions. The two Koreas have hosted 21 of these reunions since 1985.
Yeah.
Now, nearly 20,000 family members from the two sides reunited for the first time since the Korean War, but over 3,000 have died since then without ever seeing their family members.
Yeah.
So do you think these reunions can go forward?
I think no matter what, again, if you want to talk sort of like human rights or
Right.
humanitarian reasons, these family reunions are important to
Right.
do simply for the families. So many families on both sides, estimates run a third to half of all Koreans have family on the other side, one side of the border
Yes.
or another. And so simply on humanitarian grounds, having these, I think, is a good thing.
Right.
They're pure political spectacle, just like the joint Olympic teams. Both sides try and use them to make a point.
Right.
But fundamentally, getting these families together is something that I think both sides should do as often as they can.
The North Koreans aren't budging too much on that, though, right now?
Yeah, and that's one of the things, is that both sides, and particularly the North, tends to try and use these for leverage. Because they will only say, okay, we can only have so many people, and it can't be, you can't just give us a list of people, we're going to only choose the selected people, et cetera, right? So it's always, these things are always incredibly political, but at the heart of it is something incredibly humane, which is families that have been divided, trying to reunite them.
Oh yes, there was an opinion poll in South Korea about the reunification of the two peninsulas, or one peninsula.
I'm so glad you're going to ask that.
And the young people really weren't too thrilled about that. Why is that?
Because it'll cost a lot of money. And the thing that I universally wish that South Korean Gallup and opinion polls would do is stop asking this question.
Right.
Because it's the wrong question. Nobody's going to get a choice. It's not going to be able to vote. They're
No.
not going to say, are you willing to spend 20% of your salary forever?
Right.
Everyone's going to say no.
Right.
Right? The real question that they should ask is this. If North Korea collapses, who gets it? A, Japan. B, China. C, South Korea. I guarantee you 100% of those South Korean young people will say, we'll take it. And that's the way you think about unification. It's not a choice. It will never be a choice. So the idea that you put it up there, do you want it or not, is the wrong question. The question is, what do you do with the unified peninsula, right? The other way to think about it is this. You can ask South Korean people, what is Korea? no matter what they say about South Korea versus North Korea, unquestioned is that Korea goes from the Yalu River, Amnokgang, down to Jeju. That's just what it's been. That has been Korea since 668 AD.
Wow.
Part of the debate between South Koreans and Chinese is over a kingdom, Goguryeo, that existed on that northern part 1,500 years ago. If South Korean youth really didn't care about North Korea, they wouldn't care about Goguryeo. And they do.
Okay.
They clearly do. So it is a false question because they clearly, this is Korea. Because if not, they're like, I don't care, it's not my country, it's somewhere up north.
Right.
But that's not what they say. They say, Goguryeo Korean. So clearly they think Korea is the whole peninsula.
I see.
So this is a wrong question to ask.
Okay, now you mentioned the collapse of North Korea. Now, that
Don't
doesn't.
hold your breath.
No, that's why I'm asking. I'm going, this is new to me. I've never heard anybody talk about that. Why do you think that's something to even mention?
Well, the only way I see unification coming is if North Korea collapses. I mean, both sides would like unification.
What do you mean by collapse?
Well, okay, collapse would have to be somehow the regime implodes or the family gets in some bloodbath or whatever, you know, something, some kind of highly unlikely event in which the political structure of North Korea just collapses somehow or implodes, or there's a palace coup and a civil war or something in North Korea.
So do you think there's a chance that the uprising from the people could do anything?
Almost none, and that's
Really?
one of the reasons that we talk about as sort of top-down. The idea that in North Korea you could have some kind of a velvet revolution, some kimchi revolution. One thing about the North Korean repressive regime, it's hard for us to imagine how the people are going to organize in a way that they could possibly overcome the regime. So this is going to have to be a top-down as opposed to a bottom-up. Everything we know about North Korea.
Yeah, it seems like a grassroots organization would be impossible just because of the tight control.
Yeah,
All
right. So, you know, no one's really holding their breath anymore for North Korea. I mean, and here's the other way to think about it. If North Korea didn't collapse 20 years ago in the mid-90s, North Korea went through a horrific famine. 500,000 to 1 million people died of starvation. If they didn't collapse then, it's hard to imagine them collapsing now.
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah. So
Now, with North Korea's nuclear threat and all the missile tests are going, many say Kim Jong-un is crazy. What do you say about that?
he clearly knows what he's doing.
Okay.
Right. It's easy. One of the reasons we like to call him crazy is it's just a very easy way to think about countries we don't understand. But it's not that hard to see what Kim Jong-un is doing. As I said before, the government clearly has a plan in place.
Okay.
All you have to do is watch. You don't even have to speak Korean. Just watch video footage of him. And this is a young, charismatic extrovert. He's clearly comfortable with himself. He walks around, he's giving hugs to his leaders. He is clearly the man in charge, and he clearly shows that he's comfortable with who he is. So, in many ways, the idea that he's crazy is a red herring. What we usually mean is it's hard to understand what they're doing. You know, he's acting a bit strange compared to what we would do in America.
Right.
But if you watch the basic behavior, a nuclear weapons program that is aimed at deterring the United States seems pretty straightforward. There's not random violence. The violence that has occurred along the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, is very consistent. It's very small level. It's border skirmishing. It's never gone out of that. The types of terrorism that they have engaged in has been very clearly political terrorism. So this is a regime that knows what it's doing. And the other way to put it is this. You don't keep power for 6 years in an intensely, dangerous palace type of politics situation unless you know what you're doing. And he pretty clearly is in charge. So he's not crazy.
Now, if United States and North Korean relationships are going to improve, do you feel that the United States is asking too much to ask that the North Koreans give up their nuclear program?
I don't think it's going to happen.
Right.
So in that sense, it's too much. And the basic reason is very clear. North Korea claims that it feels threatened. If they do feel threatened, then threatening them is not going to make them feel less threatened. Right? In many ways, What we have right now is deterrence, and deterrence works. It's too costly for us to attack North Korea. It's too costly for them to attack us. It's worked since 1953, right? What I often say when people ask me about North Korea is that it's not a problem to be solved. I don't have a solution. There's no combination of threats and sticks and carrots and engagement that I could tell you that would get North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons, stop abusing human rights, open up the economy and become capitalist. I mean, that's an unrealistic goal.
Right.
I think rather it is a country we have to manage our relationships with. And in many ways, I think we can manage it. We can deter them. They're not going to attack first. If we don't attack North Korea, they're not going to attack us first.
Okay.
Number two, there's ways that then we can try to, whether you want pressure or carrots, to try and change the human rights situations better, even while we know that this regime is probably not going to collapse. So we have to live with it. We've lived with other countries we don't like. I'm not saying it's nice,
right,
but we've lived with the Soviet Union, we live with China, we live with many countries we don't like, and I think that's the better way to think about U.S.-North Korea relations.
Okay, that's great. Now, what about South Korean?
I'm so reasonable.
I know you are. You should be a diplomat, I think. Yeah. So, what about South Korean industry making some inroads into North Korea? Is that started yet, or is it going to start?
Started, and one of the things that we miss, particularly in the United States, because we only focus either mostly on the security and a little bit on human rights, is we miss how much North Korea has changed because of interaction with the outside world in the business sector. So South Korean business made more progress earlier, but as I said, for a number of reasons now, South Korean business has pulled out. The South Korean government and North Korean government closed a joint economic zone. At one point, there was about 500 South Korean companies working with about 100,000 North Korean laborers. Those are all done now because of the political problem.
Right.
But the overall transformation of the North Korean economy has been thorough in ways that I didn't predict 10 years ago, and I think are going to be almost impossible for the regime to pull back from. The regime has not embraced economic reform. They are trying to keep control, but in many ways, this is where the people are moving out. Gray markets, black markets, smuggling. You get DVDs and flash drives now with Korean dramas and K-pop smuggled in. There's Chinese cell phones. There is more interaction now in the black markets, partly because of the famine that people just went and crossed borders. That North Korea has changed in that way. To my mind, that's something we should encourage, is more interaction with the outside world.
So is the regime taking a regime not paying attention to these smugglings?
No, they're
and
paying
black?
a lot of attention.
Oh, really?
I mean, well, so here's the thing. One of the things that Kim Jong-un said is, now is the time to be prosperous. He's different from his father because he said North Korean people have suffered too much, which is very interesting, even if he's completely cynical. He's telling his own citizens that they shouldn't that they should have more material benefits.
Right.
So he's trying to walk a knife edge between some reform, but not too much, and losing control. For North Koreans themselves, one of the real questions has always been, how do you eat, how do you survive when a regime is completely repressive, but doesn't have that much money to bribe you with? The economy is basically very weak. So one of the things about the gray markets is this. Now, someone before, when they first started to try and smuggle 10 or 20 years ago, someone would go across the border, and you know what? The border guards would try and catch them. Not supposed to do that. But they realized very quickly that that was going to kill the golden goose, or the goose that lays the golden eggs.
Right.
And that instead of arresting this guy, if you took a bribe every time he went across, the border guard's life is better off, his family's better off, 10, 15%, right? He can then bribe the local provincial official. So there is a real sort of morphing now of a gray market equilibrium in which a lot of corruption, a lot of business gets done that has made lives better off. And the government as a whole has a hard time cracking down on it.
But they're not turning a blind eye to it. Like if this border guard got caught, you know, he'd be in big trouble.
Yeah, and that's why the bribes go all the way up, et cetera,
Right.
et cetera,
Okay,
right?
I
You know,
see.
so there really are, and some of the politics we know at the highest levels tends to be usually about control over access to Chinese funds, businesses, et cetera, meaning there's a lot of goodies to be handed out, and the politics goes all the way up.
I never hear about North Korean industry. What are they doing? What do they make? Do they make anything? What do they do?
Yeah, no, North Korean industry. There was, again, there is a nascent light manufacturers where usually with South Korean capital, Chinese capital, a Swedish company was making jeans for a while. You bring in the capital and you use North Korean labor to assemble light manufacturers. But most North Korean industry is extractive, coal, mining, and then you have some of the agricultural stuff.
Yes.
You know, it's
Nothing
basic-
high-tech.
No, not really. Right.
Okay. Except for their movie industry. I hear that's...
No, they do, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's, yes.
they do make a lot of movies, I've
Yes,
heard.
and,
Yeah.
and videos. And
Yeah. This has been John Martin reporting from the University of Michigan for the Michigan Korean Times TV News Point. Have a marvelous day.